Imagine, dear listener, that you are lying down comfortably, the weight of the day fading away. Your eyelids grow heavy and your breath begins to slow. As you drift toward rest, I will guide you through a calm, continuous story, a story stretching across centuries, landscapes, and cultures. Tonight, we explore the history of Alexander the Great and the Kingdom of Macedon, spoken in soft tones that inform yet gently ease you toward sleep. Our journey begins not with Alexander himself, but with the lands and people who came before him. For history is never born in isolation. It is a tapestry woven from earlier threads. The Kingdom of Macedon, nestled in the northern part of ancient Greece, was once considered a frontier land. The southern Greeks, proud of their great city-states like Athens and Sparta, often looked upon the Macedonians as semi-barbaric. Yet this rugged land, with its mountains, fertile plains, and deep forests, was destined to produce one of history's most remarkable figures. The Macedonians were a people shaped by geography. To the west, the Pindus Mountains formed natural barriers. To the north lay Thrace and Illyria, lands filled with tribes often at odds with Macedon. And to the south, the glittering cities of Greece stood as rivals and at times reluctant allies. Life in Macedon was less urban and more rural than in Athens or Corinth. Herding, farming, and horseback riding formed part of daily existence. These people, strong and resilient, grew up in an environment where martial skill was valued and loyalty to the king was essential. When we speak of Alexander, we must also speak of his father, King Philip II of Macedon. Before Philip, Macedon was often divided, vulnerable to invasions, and seen as an afterthought in Greek affairs. But Philip, through both military innovation and careful diplomacy, transformed it into a unified and powerful kingdom. He introduced new tactics, like the use of the phalanx with longer spears, known as the sarissa, and he built a professional army that blended Macedonian strength with Greek expertise. It is under his reign that Macedon rose from obscurity to prominence, setting the stage for Alexander's later conquests. Yet Philip's reign was not merely about military reform. He cultivated alliances through marriage, forging bonds across the Greek world and beyond. He also laid claim to leadership of the Hellenic League, a federation of Greek states that recognized Macedonian supremacy. His vision extended across the Aegean Sea, toward Persia, the mighty empire stretching from Asia Minor to India. It was Philip who first conceived the idea of a campaign against Persia, a dream Alexander would inherit and surpass. Alexander was born in 356 BCE, in the city of Pella, Macedon's capital. His mother, Olympias, was a strong-willed woman from Epirus, and her influence on Alexander was profound. Ancient sources often portray her as deeply spiritual, devoted to rituals and the worship of Dionysus. Through her, Alexander inherited not only a fierce sense of destiny, but also an emotional intensity that shaped his character. From Philip, he received discipline, ambition, and the craft of leadership. Thus, in his very parentage, Alexander was the product of both vision and passion. The young prince's education was entrusted to none other than Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers of all time. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander studied literature, science, medicine, and philosophy. He learned of Homer's epics, particularly the Iliad, which he cherished so deeply that he kept a copy by his side during his campaigns. Aristotle instilled in him a love for knowledge and inquiry, but also a sense of Greek superiority, a belief that Greek culture was a beacon of civilization. This duality of admiration for learning and conviction in his own destiny would follow Alexander throughout his life. As we drift gently forward in time, we see Alexander grow from boy to youth, shaped by tutors, by his mother's whispers of divine ancestry, and by his father's example as a conqueror. His childhood was marked not by stillness, but by constant preparation. He tamed the horse Bucephalus, a feat that astonished even Philip. He accompanied his father on campaigns, learning firsthand the arts of strategy and command. In all these ways, Alexander was being readied, not only to rule Macedon, but to transform the known world. But before Alexander could take up this mantle, tragedy struck. In 336 BCE, Philip was assassinated under mysterious circumstances during a celebration at Aegae. The young Alexander, just 20 years old, suddenly ascended the throne. It was a perilous moment. Rivals circled, enemies plotted, and foreign powers doubted the boy king's ability. Yet Alexander acted with decisive swiftness. He eliminated rivals, secured loyalty among the Macedonian nobles, and reaffirmed Macedon's dominance in Greece. The story of Alexander is not just that of conquest, but of vision. He imagined an empire uniting East and West, blending cultures rather than simply erasing them. Though his campaigns were brutal and unrelenting, he also founded cities, spread knowledge, and encouraged the mingling of traditions. His empire, though short-lived, planted seeds that grew for centuries in the realms of philosophy, science, art, and governance. And so, dear listener, as you breathe slowly and deeply, you may picture a vast stage being prepared. The curtain of history rises on a young king who would, within a decade, create one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. But for now, in this introduction, we linger in the quiet before the storm. We see the rugged hills of Macedon, hear the clatter of soldiers training with their sarissas, and imagine the thoughtful young prince listening to Aristotle under the shade of a tree. The world is waiting, and destiny stirs. In the chapters to come, we will drift steadily through Alexander's rise, his great campaigns, his encounters with foreign lands, and the legacy he left behind. Like gentle waves on a timeless sea, the story will unfold at a pace that soothes, yet informs. You may rest, knowing that history is alive, not in hurried events, but in the slow rhythm of understanding. Close your eyes, let the words settle around you, and prepare to wander with me through the life of Alexander the Great and the kingdom of Macedon. Before the figure of Alexander the Great emerges in full brightness, we must first pause to consider the roots of the kingdom that produced him. The land of Macedon, lying in the northern reaches of the Greek world, is often overlooked in the grand sweep of classical history, overshadowed by the gleaming cities of Athens and Sparta. Yet it is here, amid rugged mountains and fertile plains, that the foundations of empire were quietly set in place long before Alexander ever marched eastward. The geography of Macedon itself tells part of this story. To the west, the land rose in jagged ridges of the Pindus Mountains, offering both protection and isolation. To the north, it bordered territories inhabited by Thracian and Illyrian tribes, peoples who were fierce and often hostile. To the south, beyond Thessaly, lay the bustling and cultured city-states of Greece proper. Macedon was, in essence, a frontier kingdom, positioned at the meeting place of Greek civilization and the tribal worlds beyond. This in-between character shaped its people into something distinct: tough, pragmatic, and resilient. Daily life for Macedonians was simple and agrarian. Families tended flocks of sheep and goats, cultivated grain on the broad plains, and hunted in dense forests. Unlike the Athenians, who filled the agora with debate, or the Spartans, who devoted their lives to martial training, Macedonians balanced subsistence with survival. Theirs was a kingdom less urbanized, with fewer grand temples and theaters, but deeply tied to the rhythms of the land. This rural lifestyle fostered strong bonds between clans, and loyalty to the ruling king was not just political, but deeply personal. The Macedonian monarchy was hereditary and ancient. Long before Philip and Alexander, kings traced their lineage to the Argead dynasty, which claimed descent from Heracles, the legendary Greek hero. This claim was not merely symbolic. It gave Macedonian rulers a thread of legitimacy that tied them to the broader tapestry of Greek myth and tradition. Yet, for much of its early history, Macedon was seen by its southern neighbors as somewhat backward. The Athenians and Spartans often derided Macedonians as half-barbaric, their dialect strange, their customs less refined. And yet, from this overlooked corner, the seeds of greatness germinated. The early Macedonian kings faced constant challenges. Tribal incursions from the north pressed their borders, while ambitious Greek states to the south sought influence. To survive, the kings of Macedon had to cultivate both martial strength and diplomatic flexibility. They ruled not as distant figures, but as warrior leaders, riding alongside their soldiers in battle, sharing hardships, and securing loyalty through both charisma and reward. In this way, the Macedonian monarchy resembled the tribal chieftaincies of neighboring peoples, though it carried within it the spark of larger ambitions. Trade and contact with the Greek world also shaped Macedon. Timber from Macedon's forests was highly prized, especially by naval powers like Athens, which required strong wood for shipbuilding. This resource gave Macedon a measure of leverage, as well as exposure to Greek markets and ideas. Slowly, the kingdom began to bridge the divide between rustic frontier and cultured Hellenic state. By the time of King Archelaus in the late 5th century BCE, Pella became the new capital, replacing Aigai. Archelaus encouraged poets, artists, and thinkers to visit his court, and in so doing began the slow transformation of Macedon into a player of cultural as well as political significance. Still, the kingdom remained fragile. Successive rulers faced assassinations, invasions, and internal strife. In many ways, early Macedon's history is one of constant struggle to maintain cohesion in the face of external threats and internal rivalries. Yet it is precisely this crucible of adversity that forged the political and military traditions Alexander would later inherit. Macedonians lived with the ever-present awareness that their survival depended upon unity under strong kingship, readiness for war, and resilience against adversity. Imagine, for a moment, the sights and sounds of Macedon in these centuries before Philip and Alexander. Small villages dotting the countryside, farmers plowing under a broad sky, shepherds leading their flocks across rolling hills, warriors sharpening their spears and tending to their horses. The air filled with both the serenity of rural life and the tension of a land always watching for enemies beyond its borders. This is the backdrop against which the story of empire would unfold. It is also worth noting that Macedon's culture, while distinct, was never wholly apart from Greece. Its kings competed in the Olympic Games, claiming their Greek heritage. They patronized Greek artists and welcomed Greek teachers. The flow of ideas and traditions across boundaries enriched Macedon and prepared the ground for its eventual dominance of the Hellenic world. Where once Athenians dismissed Macedonians as outsiders, soon they would bow to Macedonian leadership, a reversal born of both ambition and necessity. As we let this picture settle in our minds, we can see how the kingdom of Macedon, though modest in its beginnings, carried within it certain traits: a rugged people, a monarchy rooted in heroic myth, and a culture at the crossroads of worlds. These elements combine to produce a society both flexible and formidable, ready to be shaped by a visionary ruler. That ruler would come in the person of Philip II, father to Alexander, whose reforms would propel Macedon onto the grand stage of history. But for now, as you drift deeper into rest, hold this thought gently. Greatness often arises not from the most polished or prestigious centers, but from lands underestimated, from peoples underestimated, who quietly prepare themselves in the shadows. Macedon was one such land. From its hills and plains would come not just a king, but a conqueror who would carry its name across continents. When the curtain of history rises again, we see a new figure entering the stage, a man who would transform Macedon from a vulnerable frontier into the most formidable power of the Greek world. This man was Philip II, the father of Alexander, and without his vision, reforms, and determination, the later achievements of his son would have been unthinkable. Philip was born around 382 BCE, the youngest son of King Amyntas III. In his youth, he was sent as a hostage to Thebes, a common practice of the time to secure alliances. What might have seemed like misfortune instead became a rare gift. At Thebes, Philip observed firsthand the military innovations of the Theban generals Epaminondas and Pelopidas, who had humbled mighty Sparta at the Battle of Leuctra. He studied the discipline of their troops, the organization of their formations, and the potential of tactical creativity. These lessons, absorbed quietly by the young Macedonian prince, would later flower into revolutionary reforms. When Philip returned to Macedon in 364 BCE, his kingdom was fragile and exposed. The throne passed through several unstable reigns after his father's death, and by the time Philip came to power in 359 BCE, Macedon was threatened on all sides. Illyrian tribes pressed from the northwest, Paeonian raiders from the north, and Greek city-states to the south eyed the weakened kingdom with opportunism. Yet, with remarkable resolve, Philip seized the kingship and acted decisively. The heart of Philip's achievement lay in his transformation of the Macedonian army. He reorganized the infantry into a disciplined phalanx, equipping soldiers with the sarissa, a spear far longer than those used by traditional hoplites. These weapons, when wielded in tight formation, created a wall of bristling points that could dominate open battlefields. Yet Philip did not stop there. He integrated cavalry, particularly the elite companion cavalry, into coordinated maneuvers with the infantry. This combination of flexible infantry and powerful cavalry gave Macedon a decisive edge over traditional Greek forces. But Philip's strength was not merely military. He also mastered the art of diplomacy. He married strategically, forging bonds with neighboring states. Olympias of Epirus, his most famous wife, was one such alliance. Through marriages, treaties, and bribes, Philip secured allies and sowed divisions among his enemies. He understood that conquest required not just battles, but also patience, persuasion, and cunning. As his power grew, Philip expanded Macedonian control southward. He asserted influence over Thessaly and intervened in the Sacred War, a conflict among Greek states that gave him the chance to appear as a defender of the sacred sanctuaries of Apollo at Delphi. By positioning himself as both protector and conqueror, Philip gained prestige. By the mid-340s BCE, Macedon's influence had spread across northern and central Greece, reshaping the balance of power in the region. Philip's crowning political achievement was the creation of the League of Corinth in 337 BCE. This alliance of Greek states, formed under Macedonian leadership, effectively ended centuries of rivalry among the city-states, at least temporarily. Sparta famously refused to join, but most others accepted Philip's dominance. To the Greek world weary of endless wars, Philip presented himself as the unifier who could lead them toward a greater purpose. That purpose was war against Persia, the mighty empire across the Aegean. The idea of punishing Persia for its invasions of Greece a century and a half earlier resonated deeply, and Philip was elected commander of the Hellenic League's forces. In the midst of these sweeping accomplishments, Philip also left his mark on the very fabric of Macedon. He strengthened cities, improved administration, and cultivated a court that attracted thinkers, artisans, and strategists. Under Philip, Macedon became not just a military machine, but also a more cohesive and prosperous state. Yet Philip's reign was not without shadows. His personal life was complex, with multiple wives and children, leading to rivalries within his household. His relationships with allies and enemies alike were often marked by shifting loyalties. And in 336 BCE, during the celebration of his daughter's wedding at Aegae, Philip was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards. The motives remain debated, perhaps personal grievance, perhaps a deeper conspiracy. Regardless of the cause, Philip's sudden death sent shockwaves through Macedon and Greece. It is here that the threads of fate draw tight. Philip's vision had been clear: unify Greece and march eastward to challenge Persia. He had prepared the stage meticulously, building an army of unparalleled strength and rallying Greek states under his banner. Yet he would not live to see this grand campaign realized. That destiny would pass instead to his 20-year-old son, Alexander. As we let the scene fade gently in our minds, we can reflect on Philip's legacy. He was a man of both brilliance and ruthlessness, a builder of armies and empires, whose reforms would echo long after his death. He took a fragile frontier kingdom and transformed it into a powerhouse, giving his son the tools to dream beyond Greece. Without Philip, there could be no Alexander the Great. And so, as your breathing slows and your mind drifts further toward rest, imagine the fields of Macedon alive with the disciplined march of soldiers, their sarissas glinting in the sunlight. Picture Philip surveying his army, seeing not only men in ranks, but the promise of conquest stretching beyond the horizon. The vision was his, but the execution would belong to the son who now stepped into his place. As the story unfolds further, we turn our attention to the early years of Alexander himself. Born in 356 BCE in the Macedonian capital of Pella, Alexander entered a world already brimming with ambition, rivalry, and visions of greatness. His father, Philip II, had set about forging a kingdom of strength and innovation, while his mother, Olympias, infused in him a sense of destiny that reached beyond the ordinary. In the quiet moments of infancy and youth, the threads of legend began to intertwine with the fabric of his upbringing. From the beginning, Alexander's birth was surrounded by omens. Ancient writers tell us that on the night of his arrival, the temple of Artemis at Ephesus was set ablaze, an event interpreted by some as a sign that the goddess was absent, attending the birth of a child who would one day conquer the world. Olympias herself nurtured the belief that her son was touched by divinity, perhaps descended not merely from Philip's heroic ancestry, but from Zeus himself. These whispers of divine heritage were more than tales. They shaped Alexander's own self-perception, giving him a profound sense of purpose that endured throughout his life. His mother, Olympias, was a strong and enigmatic presence. Fiercely devoted, politically astute, and deeply involved in religious rites, she instilled in Alexander both intensity and conviction. She taught him the importance of loyalty and ambition, while also reminding him of the god's role in human affairs. Her influence balanced the practical and martial training he received from Philip, making Alexander a blend of mystical belief and disciplined strategy. By his youth, Alexander was already displaying unusual courage and intelligence. One story often retold is his taming of the horse Bucephalus. When no one else could master the powerful animal, Alexander observed that it was afraid of its own shadow. By turning Bucephalus toward the sun, he calmed it and mounted successfully. This act so impressed Philip that he is said to have remarked, "My son, seek a kingdom equal to yourself. Macedon is too small for you." Whether apocryphal or true, the tale captures the essence of Alexander's early promise: insight, bravery, and the will to dominate challenges others could not. The shaping of Alexander's mind was entrusted to one of the greatest philosophers of antiquity, Aristotle. Under his tutelage, Alexander absorbed lessons in philosophy, science, medicine, and politics. He read Homer's epics with particular devotion, keeping a copy of the Iliad with him on his campaigns. From Aristotle, he learned about the natural world, the importance of observation, and the subtleties of persuasion and governance. Yet Aristotle also instilled a sense of Greek superiority, emphasizing the divide between Hellenic culture and the so-called barbarian worlds beyond. This teaching would both inspire Alexander to spread Greek ideals and complicate his later attempts to blend cultures within his empire. But Alexander's education was not confined to books and lectures. Philip ensured that his son experienced the realities of war and politics from a young age. He accompanied his father on campaigns, witnessing firsthand the strategies that had transformed Macedon into a military power. He learned to command troops, to negotiate alliances, and to understand the delicate balance of loyalty among nobles and generals. By his late teens, Alexander had already led forces in battle, demonstrating not just competence, but brilliance. At the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE, where Macedon decisively defeated the combined armies of Athens and Thebes, Alexander commanded the left wing and played a key role in the victory. It was his first true taste of command, and it revealed the spark of the strategist he would become. Life in the Macedonian court was a constant swirl of intrigue and rivalry. Philip's multiple marriages created competing factions, each vying for influence. Alexander's bond with his mother often set him at odds with his father's other wives and their children. These tensions honed Alexander's political instincts, teaching him to navigate suspicion, ambition, and betrayal. Though still a prince, he was already preparing to be a king who must guard himself as carefully as he guarded his kingdom. And yet, beyond politics and warfare, Alexander remained a young man with human tastes and friendships. He was known for his camaraderie with companions such as Hephaestion, who would remain his closest confidant throughout his life. Their bond, often compared to the legendary friendship of Achilles and Patroclus, was a source of strength and intimacy for Alexander. Such relationships grounded him amid the storms of ambition and conflict. As we imagine Alexander in these years, we can see him walking through the colonnades of Pella, conversing with Aristotle beneath the shade of trees, or galloping across the fields with Bucephalus at his side. We picture a youth who is not yet the conqueror of Asia, but who already carries himself with a sense of destiny. The land of Macedon, rough and proud, prepared him for hardship, while his teachers prepared him for command. His father's victories showed him the possibilities of power, and his mother's devotion convinced him that greatness was his birthright. By the time Philip stood at the height of his power, Alexander was more than an heir. He was already a figure of authority and charisma. Soldiers respected him, nobles feared him, and allies recognized in him the spark of leadership. All the elements, education, upbringing, experience, and belief in his divine destiny, combined to form a young man unlike any other of his generation. As you rest more deeply now, let your mind linger on the image of Alexander before the great tide of history sweeps him forward. He is still a youth, still in training, still absorbing lessons that will carry him to distant lands. The horses neigh in the royal stables, the soldiers drill in the fields, and the young prince contemplates the lines of Homer's verse. The storm has not yet broken, but the air is heavy with anticipation. The year 336 BCE marked a sudden and dramatic shift in the fortunes of Macedon. At the grand celebration of his daughter Cleopatra's marriage in the city of Aegae, King Philip II, who had built Macedon into a power feared across Greece, was struck down by an assassin's blade. Whether his death was the result of personal grievance, political conspiracy, or the tangled intrigues of his court remains debated to this day. What is certain is that Philip's passing left his 20-year-old son, Alexander, to inherit both the throne and the many dangers that came with it. At such a young age, the weight upon Alexander's shoulders was immense. Macedon's enemies, both internal and external, doubted his capacity to rule. Rivals within the royal family, including half-siblings and ambitious nobles, sought their chance to seize the crown. Neighboring states and tribes, who had long feared Philip's growing power, watched carefully, ready to challenge the inexperienced successor. The stability Philip had forged now hung in delicate balance. Yet Alexander moved with striking decisiveness. His first acts were to eliminate potential rivals and secure loyalty among the Macedonian nobility. Those suspected of conspiring against him, including possible claimants to the throne, were executed. Though harsh, these actions signaled that Alexander would not be a puppet of court factions. He would rule in his own right, and he demanded the same obedience his father had commanded. Once his position within Macedon was secured, Alexander turned to the Greek city-states. Under Philip, the League of Corinth had bound much of Greece to Macedonian leadership. With Philip gone, many cities saw an opportunity to regain their independence. Revolts erupted, most notably in Thebes, where anti-Macedonian sentiment ran strong. Athens, too, debated whether to break free. Alexander acted swiftly. Marching south with his army, he appeared before Thebes with startling speed. Thebes resisted, and Alexander responded with overwhelming force. The city was stormed and destroyed, its people either killed or enslaved, its territory divided among neighbors. Only temples and the house of the poet Pindar were spared, a symbolic gesture of respect for culture, even amid destruction. The fall of Thebes sent shockwaves across Greece. Athens, cowed by the display, submitted without resistance. Other states quickly reaffirmed their loyalty. Through this ruthless demonstration, Alexander secured Macedon's dominance and silenced doubts about his authority. Yet Alexander was not only suppressing rebellion, he was also stepping into the role his father had envisioned, that of leader of a united Greece against Persia. The League of Corinth confirmed his command of its forces, granting him legitimacy as the chosen general of the Hellenic world. For Alexander, this was not merely the continuation of his father's policy. It was the first step toward fulfilling a vision that stretched beyond Greece and into the vast empire of Persia, the greatest power of the known world. But before he could cross the sea, Alexander turned north to secure Macedon's borders. The Thracian and Illyrian tribes, sensing weakness, had begun raiding once more. In campaigns marked by speed and ferocity, Alexander subdued these threats, marching through rugged terrain and defeating enemies who thought him unprepared. These victories not only secured Macedon's frontiers, but also displayed Alexander's skill as a commander, inspiring loyalty among his troops and fear among his enemies. It was during this period that Alexander began to reveal the charisma and leadership style that defined his reign. He fought alongside his men, sharing their dangers and hardships. He rewarded loyalty generously, but punished betrayal without hesitation. He addressed his soldiers directly, inspiring them with confidence in his vision. The bond between Alexander and his army, forged in these early campaigns, would carry them through years of conquest in foreign lands. With rebellions crushed and borders secured, Alexander turned his gaze eastward. Persia, a vast empire stretching from Asia Minor to India, loomed across the Aegean Sea. For generations, the Persian wars had haunted Greek memory. The invasions of Xerxes and Darius, the burning of Athens, the battles of Marathon and Salamis. Now, with Macedon at the height of its power, Alexander stood ready to lead Greece in a war of revenge, ambition, and expansion. Before setting out, he made offerings at Troy, honoring Achilles, the hero he so admired from Homer's Iliad. The gesture was symbolic, linking his own destiny to that of the legendary warrior, suggesting that he too would carve his name into history through deeds of courage and conquest. And so, at the threshold of his campaigns, Alexander had already shown himself to be more than a youthful king. In less than 2 years, he had faced down rebellion, consolidated his throne, demonstrated military brilliance, and secured leadership of the Greek world. The sudden death of his father had seemed at first a crisis that might undo Macedon's rise. Instead, it became the crucible in which Alexander's authority was tested and affirmed. As you allow your thoughts to settle, imagine the young king standing at the edge of the sea, gazing eastward toward the lands of Persia. Behind him lies a subdued Greece. Before him lies a challenge greater than any faced by his ancestors. His soldiers prepare their ships, his companions gather at his side, and the horizon glows with the promise of glory and hardship alike. The age of Alexander's conquests is about to begin. The time has come for Alexander to step beyond the boundaries of Greece and Macedon into the world of conquest and empire. In the spring of 334 BCE, with his throne secure and his army loyal, he crossed the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Europe from Asia. It was a symbolic crossing as much as a strategic one. By stepping onto Asian soil, Alexander declared himself heir to a century-old struggle between Greece and Persia, one that had begun with the invasions of Xerxes and Darius and had never been fully forgotten. Before even beginning his campaigns, Alexander paused at the ruins of Troy. There, among the crumbling walls and silent fields, he paid homage to Achilles, his legendary hero from Homer's Iliad. Sources tell us that Alexander left offerings at Achilles' tomb and declared his desire to live up to the hero's glory. This was more than ritual. It was a statement of identity. Alexander saw himself as the new Achilles, leading his companions into epic battles that would echo through time. The Persian Empire, vast and wealthy, stretched across Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond. Its armies were numerous, and its satraps, provincial governors, ruled with considerable independence. Yet Persia was also strained by internal divisions and recent revolts. Alexander's gamble was that a swift and decisive series of victories could unravel this great empire. His first test came at the Battle of the Granicus River. Persian satraps, along with Greek mercenaries, gathered to block his advance in Asia Minor. The river, fast-flowing and steep-banked, seemed a formidable obstacle. But Alexander, showing his characteristic boldness, led his cavalry straight into the water and up the far bank, clashing head-on with Persian cavalry. In the chaos of battle, he was nearly killed, saved only by the intervention of his companions. Yet the Macedonian phalanx pressed forward, and soon the Persian forces broke. The victory at Granicus opened Asia Minor to Alexander, and many cities, fearing his approach, surrendered without resistance. As he moved deeper into Asia, Alexander demonstrated not only military strength, but also political shrewdness. He presented himself as a liberator of Greek cities long under Persian rule, promising them freedom and self-governance. This appeal won him allies and eased his advance. At the same time, he maintained discipline among his troops, forbidding looting and ensuring that his conquest was seen not as plunder, but as restoration of order. In 333 BCE, Alexander faced his greatest challenge yet at the Battle of Issus. King Darius III himself led a massive Persian army to confront the Macedonian invaders. The battlefield, a narrow plain between mountains and the sea, favored Alexander by limiting the numerical advantage of the Persians. When the battle began, Alexander led a charge with his companion cavalry directly at the Persian center, where Darius stood in his chariot. The assault caused panic. Darius fled, abandoning his family and much of his army. The rout was complete, and Alexander captured not only vast treasure, but also Darius's mother, wife, and children, whom he treated with respect and dignity. This gesture enhanced his image as a noble conqueror, even as it solidified his hold on Persia's western territories. From Issus, Alexander turned south, determined to secure the coastal cities and eliminate the Persian fleet's bases. Most cities submitted, but Tyre, proud and wealthy, resisted. What followed was one of the most remarkable sieges of antiquity. Tyre was built on an island half a mile offshore, with strong walls rising from the sea. To reach it, Alexander ordered the construction of a massive causeway, or mole, stretching from the mainland to the island. Under constant attack from Tyrian ships, his men labored for months, extending the road across the water. Finally, with siege towers and naval support, the Macedonians breached the walls. The city fell after 7 months, and though Alexander punished it harshly, the fall of Tyre sent a clear message. No fortress, however strong, could resist him. After Tyre, Alexander marched into Egypt, where he was welcomed not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. The Egyptians, long resentful of Persian rule, saw in Alexander a chance for renewal. He founded the city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast, envisioning it as a hub of trade, culture, and administration. Alexandria would later grow into one of the most influential cities of the ancient world, a testament to Alexander's vision of blending Greek and local traditions. In Egypt, he also visited the Oracle of Ammon at Siwa, deep in the desert. There the priests greeted him as the son of the god. Though the details are obscure, Alexander left convinced, or at least willing to claim, that he carried divine sanction. By this time, Alexander's reputation had grown immense. He was no longer just the young king of Macedon. He was the conqueror of Asia Minor, the defeater of Darius, the founder of cities, and a figure seen by many as chosen by the gods. Yet Persia still remained unconquered. Darius had retreated eastward, gathering new armies, and the heart of the empire lay ahead. As we close this chapter, imagine Alexander on the banks of the Nile, gazing out over the fertile plains of Egypt, the desert stretching beyond, and the shining Mediterranean at his back. His soldiers rest, their armor stacked beside them, their eyes already looking toward the horizon. The victories of Granicus, Issus, and Tyre are behind them, but the greatest challenges lie ahead. The march into the heart of Persia is about to begin, and with it the chance for Alexander to claim not just battles, but an empire. The conquest of Persia truly began when Alexander left the safety of Egypt and turned his attention eastward. The victories of Granicus and Issus had shaken Persian control in Asia Minor and the Levant, but the heart of the empire still remained intact. At its center stood Darius III, determined to rally his people and preserve what was once the mightiest realm in the known world. Alexander now faced not only a vast geographical expanse, but also the challenge of defeating an empire that had endured for centuries. The armies met in 331 BCE on the plain of Gaugamela, near the modern-day city of Mosul in Iraq. Darius assembled a force said to number in the hundreds of thousands, drawn from across the Persian lands: infantry, cavalry, war chariots, even elephants. The battlefield was carefully prepared, leveled by the Persians to give advantage to their chariots. By contrast, Alexander commanded a much smaller army, perhaps 40 to 50,000 strong, but one drilled with precision, confident in its leadership, and bound together by loyalty. On the day of battle, Alexander positioned his forces with deliberate care. His phalanx held the center, their long sarissas forming an impenetrable wall, while his companion cavalry stood on the right flank, waiting for the decisive moment. Darius placed his own troops in a wide formation, hoping to envelop the Macedonians. The clash began with the thunder of hooves as Persian chariots raced toward Alexander's lines. Yet the Macedonians calmly opened their ranks, allowing the chariots to pass through, then closed again, striking down both men and horses. At the height of the fighting, Alexander saw his opportunity. Leading the companion cavalry himself, he launched a wedge-shaped assault directly at the Persian center, aiming once more for Darius. The charge cut deep, piercing the Persian line. As at Issus, Darius faltered and fled the battlefield, his chariot abandoned in panic. Without their king, the Persian army collapsed into disarray. The victory at Gaugamela was complete, and with it, the fate of the Persian Empire was sealed. After Gaugamela, Alexander entered Babylon, one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. He was greeted not with resistance, but with open gates. The wealth of the city, its grand palaces, and its fabled hanging gardens became symbols of his triumph. Yet Alexander did not plunder indiscriminately. Instead, he sought to win legitimacy as ruler of Persia, presenting himself not merely as a conqueror, but as the rightful successor to the Achaemenid kings. From Babylon, he moved to Susa, where enormous treasures were surrendered to him, and then to Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of Persia. Persepolis, with its monumental staircases, sculpted reliefs, and glittering halls, embodied the pride of the Persian kings. Alexander entered as master, And after several months, he allowed the city to be burned, perhaps as an act of revenge for Xerxes' burning of Athens a century and a half earlier. Whether impulsive or symbolic, the flames consumed much of the city, marking the end of an era. Yet conquest was not merely about cities and treasure. Alexander pursued Darius himself, determined to secure his legitimacy through the capture of the Persian king. For months, he chased Darius across the vast reaches of Iran, through deserts and mountain passes. In 330 BCE, however, Darius was betrayed by his own satrap, Bessus, who killed him as Alexander closed in. When Alexander came upon Darius's body, he was said to have mourned the fallen king, covering him with his own cloak. He declared himself the avenger of Darius rather than merely his conqueror, adopting the mantle of the Persian monarchy. With Darius dead, Alexander faced a new challenge, ruling not only Greeks and Macedonians, but also Persians and countless other peoples within the empire. He began adopting elements of Persian dress and court ceremony, blending Greek and Eastern traditions. He appointed Persians to high positions and encouraged marriages between his officers and local women. These actions were controversial among his Macedonian companions, who feared the erosion of their distinct identity. Yet Alexander's vision was larger. He sought not only conquest, but the creation of a new world, where East and West were united under his rule. Meanwhile, resistance still smoldered in the eastern satrapies, and Alexander was far from finished with campaigning. But at this stage, his transformation was already evident. He was no longer simply the young king of Macedon or even the commander of a Greek coalition. He was king of Asia, master of Babylon, lord of Persepolis, and self-declared heir to both Greek heroes and Persian kings. As you rest now, imagine the vastness of his journey, the plains of Gaugamela echoing with the clash of cavalry, the walls of Babylon towering under the Mesopotamian sun, the stairways of Persepolis blackened by fire, and the lonely mountain passes where Darius met his end. Through each of these landscapes, Alexander strode with relentless purpose, reshaping the ancient world as he went. His empire was no longer a dream. It was a reality, and it was still growing. By 327 BCE, Alexander had achieved what many would have considered the summit of ambition: the conquest of Persia, the defeat of Darius, and the capture of the greatest cities of the East. Yet for Alexander, the horizon of empire did not end at Persepolis or Susa. His gaze stretched further, beyond the deserts of Iran, into the mysterious lands of India. To his mind, the edge of the world still lay ahead, waiting to be discovered and subdued. And so, restless and determined, he led his army eastward once again. The journey into India was arduous. His troops marched through the Hindu Kush mountains, where narrow passes and icy winds tested their endurance. Supplies were scarce and the terrain unfamiliar, yet Alexander's determination drove them forward. Along the way, he founded new cities, each bearing the mark of Hellenic culture and serving as waypoints for the administration of his growing empire. These settlements, named often after himself or his companions, became seeds of Greek influence far beyond the traditional boundaries of the Mediterranean. In the Punjab region, Alexander encountered rulers who alternately resisted or allied with him. Some surrendered readily, offering tribute and joining his ranks. Others opposed him fiercely. Among these opponents, one figure stands out in the annals of history: King Porus of the Paurava kingdom. In 326 BCE, the two armies met at the Battle of the Hydaspes River, near modern-day Jhelum in Pakistan. It was a battle unlike any Alexander had faced before. The river was swollen with monsoon rains, and on the far bank stood Porus's formidable force, including elephants, creatures unfamiliar to the Macedonians, towering beasts that terrified both men and horses. For days, the armies faced each other across the waters, until Alexander, with characteristic ingenuity, devised a daring plan. Under cover of darkness and a storm, he led a portion of his army upriver, crossing at a hidden ford. When dawn broke, Porus saw Macedonian forces advancing from the flank, and the battle was joined. The clash was fierce and chaotic. Elephants charged, scattering phalanxes, while cavalry swirled around the muddy fields. Yet Alexander's coordination of cavalry and infantry, owned through years of campaigning, ultimately prevailed. Despite wounds and losses, the Macedonians forced Porus to yield. When the battle ended, Alexander did something unexpected. Instead of punishing Porus, he treated him with honor. Asked how he wished to be treated, Porus is said to have replied, "Like a king." Impressed, Alexander not only spared him, but reinstated him as ruler, even granting him more territory. This act reflected Alexander's policy of integrating conquered leaders into his empire, blending local authority with Macedonian oversight. It also demonstrated his ability to see beyond mere conquest, fostering loyalty through respect. Yet the march into India revealed the limits of even Alexander's ambition. His soldiers, weary from years of campaigning, battered by monsoons, and unnerved by the prospect of facing even greater forces further east, began to murmur of home. At the Hyphasis River, the modern Beas, the army refused to march further. For the first time, Alexander faced the immovable will of his troops. Despite his persuasive speeches, despite his vision of reaching the ocean that marked the world's edge, he was forced to turn back. Though disappointed, Alexander did not abandon exploration. As the army marched southward along the Indus River, he engaged in further battles, subdued resistant tribes, and founded new cities. The campaign was marked by both triumphs and hardships, with Alexander sustaining injuries and his army enduring grueling conditions. Eventually, he reached the Arabian Sea, where he ordered a fleet to be constructed under his admiral, Nearchus, to explore the waters and establish connections between his eastern conquests and the heart of his empire. The return journey across the Gedrosian Desert, in present-day southern Iran, was one of the harshest ordeals of the entire campaign. The blazing sun, shifting sands, and lack of water decimated his army. Thousands perished from thirst and exhaustion. Yet Alexander shared in their suffering, marching on foot, refusing water unless it could be shared, and demonstrating once again his bond with his soldiers. The march through Gedrosia became a symbol of endurance, a reminder that conquest was not only about victories, but also about survival against the elements. By the time Alexander reemerged from the desert, his empire stretched from Greece to India, an expanse larger than any seen before in the Western world. Yet the campaigns had left both triumph and exhaustion in their wake. For Alexander, the dream of reaching the ends of the earth remained alive. For his soldiers, however, the longing for home grew stronger than the allure of further conquest. As you drift deeper into rest, picture the strange and wondrous sights of this journey eastward. The swollen rivers of India crossed under stormy skies, the elephants trumpeting and charging, casting long shadows in the rain, the glitter of monsoon drops on bronze armor, and finally, the vast and merciless desert, stretching endlessly beneath the burning sun. In each landscape, Alexander pressed forward, a figure driven by a vision larger than life, while his men followed, torn between loyalty and longing. The march into India had revealed both the greatness and the limits of empire. The long march back from India marked a turning point, not only in Alexander's campaigns, but in his very life. The dream of pushing further eastward had ended at the Hyphasis River, and though he had carved a path across Asia, the return journey forced him to confront the realities of empire, fatigue, and mortality. The man who had once seemed destined to march forever now began to circle back toward Babylon, the city that would serve as the seat of his last days. After the harsh crossing of the Gedrosian Desert, Alexander rejoined his fleet at the Persian Gulf and moved northward once again. His empire, vast and diverse, now required attention to administration as much as to conquest. In Susa, he organized mass weddings between his Macedonian officers and Persian noblewomen, including his own marriage to Statira, daughter of the late Darius III. This event, remembered as the Susa weddings, was symbolic of Alexander's vision for unity, a blending of Greek and Persian elites into a single ruling class. Yet not all welcomed this union. Many Macedonians resented what they saw as the erosion of their culture and traditions, uneasy at their king's growing adoption of Persian customs. Alexander himself continued to embrace the role of a ruler who transcended boundaries. He adopted Persian dress and court rituals, expecting prostration from his subjects in the Persian manner. This act, known as proskynesis, was met with resistance from his Macedonian companions, who viewed it as a humiliation reserved for gods, not men. The tension revealed the strain between Alexander's vision of fusion and the loyalty of those who had followed him from Macedon. Despite these challenges, Alexander pressed on with new plans. He sought to expand his empire westward by launching campaigns into Arabia, and he began reorganizing his territories with new governors, roads, and trade networks. His focus was no longer solely on conquest, but on creating the framework for a world empire that could endure beyond him. He dispatched expeditions to explore distant regions, mapped coastlines, and envisioned connections between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. His imagination stretched as far as his armies once had. But shadows loomed. In 324 BCE, at the city of Opis, tensions erupted between Alexander and his soldiers. Resentful of his preference for Persian customs and his incorporation of foreign troops, the Macedonians mutinied, demanding to return home. For days, they refused to obey him. In response, Alexander isolated himself, declaring that he would continue his conquests with Persians if the Macedonians no longer wished to follow. The standoff ended only when the soldiers, overcome with regret, begged forgiveness. The reconciliation was marked by a moving ceremony in which Alexander prayed for harmony between his Greek and Persian subjects. Still, the incident revealed cracks in the bond that had carried him so far. In Babylon, Alexander made the city his new capital, a hub from which he envisioned governing his sprawling dominion. Plans for further conquests into Arabia and perhaps beyond were underway. Ships were being prepared, supply lines organized. Yet his body and spirit bore the marks of years of unrelenting campaigns. The desert march, the wounds of battle, and the endless strain had weakened even this most vigorous of leaders. In the spring of 323 BCE, during a banquet in Babylon, Alexander fell ill. Accounts differ. Some say it was fever, others suspect poisoning, though no certainty has ever been reached. For days he grew weaker, unable to speak, though still conscious of the loyal soldiers who filed past his bed to see him one final time. At the age of 32, after barely a decade of rule, Alexander the Great died. His empire stretched farther than any before him, yet it was held together by the force of his will alone. The question of succession loomed immediately. Alexander had no clear heir. His only legitimate son, Alexander IV, was born after his death. His generals, the companions who had shared in his conquests, now turned against one another in the wars of the Diadochi, carving the empire into fragments. The unity Alexander had envisioned dissolved into rival kingdoms, each claiming to carry forward part of his legacy. And yet, even in fragmentation, his influence endured. The cities he founded spread Greek language, art, and culture across Asia. Trade flourished between East and West. Philosophers, scientists, and artists thrived in new centers of learning like Alexandria in Egypt. The mingling of Greek and Eastern traditions created the Hellenistic world, a new age of cultural fusion that shaped history for centuries to come. As you close your eyes more deeply, let the image of Babylon at twilight drift into your mind. The broad avenues crowded with people from every land, the palace glowing with torchlight, and in its chambers the great conqueror lying still, his voice silenced but his vision echoing onward. Around him, generals whisper and argue, the future uncertain, the present heavy with grief. His empire will not hold as he dreamed, but the memory of his ambition will ripple across generations. Alexander's final days remind us that even the greatest figures are bound by time, that even the brightest flame must eventually fade. Yet in fading, it casts a light that lingers long after, shaping the course of history. The death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE left behind not only grief and uncertainty, but also an empire that stretched farther than any single ruler had ever held in the Western world. Yet his passing, at just 32 years old, also revealed a truth of empire, that conquests may be swift, but governance and legacy endure through generations. To close our story, let us drift gently through the aftermath of Alexander's reign, the division of his realm, and the long-lasting imprint of his vision on the world. When Alexander died in Babylon, no clear plan of succession had been left. His wife, Roxana, carried a child, but the boy, later known as Alexander IV, was not yet born. His half-brother, Aridaeus, was alive but mentally unfit to rule alone. Into this vacuum stepped Alexander's generals, the men who had marched with him through deserts, rivers, and distant lands. Known as the Diadochi, or successors, they soon fell into conflict, each seeking to claim a portion of the great empire. At first, an uneasy arrangement was made. Aridaeus and the infant Alexander IV were declared kings, while the generals ruled as regents. But unity quickly dissolved. Antipater took control of Macedon and Greece. Ptolemy seized Egypt. Seleucus gained much of the eastern provinces, and Lysimachus and Cassander claimed other territories. The wars of the Diadochi turned Alexander's dream of one empire into a patchwork of rival kingdoms. Yet in their rivalry, they still carried his legacy forward, building dynasties that preserved Greek influence across Asia and the Mediterranean. Among these successor states, the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt stood out as particularly enduring. Under Ptolemy and his descendants, the city of Alexandria grew into a beacon of learning, trade, and culture. Its great library filled with texts from across the known world, and its lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, reflected Alexander's vision of cities as centers of connection and knowledge. Though he did not live to see it flourish, Alexandria embodied the synthesis of Greek and Eastern traditions he had set in motion. The Seleucid Empire, stretching from Anatolia to Persia, carried Greek culture deep into Asia, blending it with local customs. In the Far East, Greek art and language left marks as far as Bactria and the Indus Valley. Even in India, where Alexander's armies had once clashed with King Porus, echoes of Hellenic influence remained in art, coinage, and architecture. The Gandhara style of Buddhist sculpture, with serene figures draped in flowing robes reminiscent of Greek statues, offers a striking example of this cultural blending. This period, known as the Hellenistic Age, was defined by fusion. Greek philosophy mingled with Eastern thought, scientific inquiry expanded in astronomy, mathematics, and medicine, and art became more expressive and far-reaching. The legacy of Alexander was not simply the memory of conquest, but the creation of a world in which cultures met and reshaped one another. At the same time, his legacy remained contested. To Greeks, he was a hero who had avenged the invasions of Persia and spread their culture to new lands. To Persians, he was both conqueror and successor, a foreigner who had claimed their throne but also respected their traditions. To later generations, he became a figure of legend, celebrated in romance literature and folklore far beyond the historical record. In Persian tales, he appears as Iskandar. In medieval European stories, he is the knightly Alexander. In the Islamic world, he is remembered as Dhul Qarnayn, the two-horned one. But what of Alexander himself? Was he driven by a genuine vision of unity or by boundless ambition? Ancient sources differ. Some portray him as noble, magnanimous, and visionary. Others emphasize his ruthlessness, his adoption of foreign customs, and his bouts of rage and cruelty. Perhaps he was all of these at once, a man of contradictions, larger than life, whose brilliance and flaws alike shaped the course of history. What cannot be denied is the scale of his achievement. In just over a decade, he created an empire stretching from Greece to India, a feat that required not only military genius, but also charisma, resilience, and imagination. Though the empire fragmented after his death, the world it left behind bore his imprint. The Hellenistic kingdoms flourished for centuries, and even Rome, which rose to dominance later, drew upon the models established in Alexander's wake. Julius Caesar, Augustus, and countless others looked back to him as the standard of greatness. As we bring this narrative to its quiet close, imagine the landscapes once touched by Alexander's march. The hills of Macedon, where he grew up, the dusty plains of Gaugamela, where empires shifted, the waters of the Hydaspes, where elephants clashed with phalanxes, the desert sands of Gedrosia, where endurance was tested, and the great city of Babylon, where his life ended. Across these places, the echoes of his presence lingered, carried forward by those who remembered and retold his story. And so as you drift into deeper rest, let the thought settle gently. Alexander's life was brief, but its resonance was vast. His empire may not have endured as a political unity, but his vision of blending cultures, spreading knowledge, and expanding horizons shaped the ancient world, and in many ways, our world today. From beginnings in rugged Macedon to the farthest reaches of India, his journey remains one of history's most remarkable tales. Close your eyes and picture the timeless sea of history, where the ripples of his deeds still move across the surface. Let those ripples carry you softly into dreams, where the great stories of the past continue to whisper, calm and eternal.